I've been charged on behalf of Pittsburgh Public Library to thank you all for coming, especially Leslie and Tom, who came such a distance, not a smaller distance with HC and Al. This is another one of the wonderful programs that you've been to, many of you in this room. How cold is it? It's pretty cold, but it's not in here because there's something wrong with the thermostat that hasn't been fixed, so you may have to peel off a little as time goes on. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, JT. Hello, happy Sunday. What a beautiful winter afternoon. Nice to see the sun and wonderful to see all of you. I'm Leslie VanHolten. I am co-editor of Kansas Matters with Tom Averill, and just so delighted to be in Pittsburgh. I have said that, Kansas is definitely my home, but my roots were strengthened here through poetry. And so the poetry legacy of Pittsburgh with Eugene DeGruson and the Little Balkans Review and all of the many fine poets who have come from this region, some of which are with us today. I'm a little emotional about it, so thank you for having us. I'm not going to speak much today because we have some real talent here in the room and I want them to have time. So what I'm going to do is some quick introductions of who you'll be hearing from, and then we'll moderate a Q&A at the end of it if you have questions for us. We do have some books for sale in the back afterward. All right, so we'll get started. I'm going to start with my co-editor, Thomas Fox Averill, is from Topeka. He is somebody that I often think doesn't need an introduction, but I do it anyway. He is Professor Emeritus of English at Washburn University, where he taught creative writing and Kansas studies. He is an O. Henry Award short story winner with 10 books. Is this the 11th? Okay, 11 books. His introduction to What Kansas Means to Me, 20th Century Writers on the Sunflower State, which you'll hear a little bit more about in a minute, was titled Afflicted with Affection, and he remains so. In 2010, he created the Thomas Fox Averill Kansas Studies Collection at Washburn's Mabee Library. And then I'm going to do these introductions, maybe not in the order that will be here. Is HC going first, and then you're going first? Okay. JT Knoll, I get the feeling knows everybody in this room, is the author of Paperboy, True Stories, Entry, Exit Point, Chorus Line, Where the Pavement Ends, Fetch Crazy, and Counterpart. The collection Ghost Sign, co-authored with Al Ortolani, Adam Jameson, and Melissa Fite Johnson, which I will say in Lawrence, we have stolen her from you all. So sorry, but I'm selfish. I'm happy to have her. Was selected as a Kansas Notable Book for 2017. He lives with his wife Linda and Arlo the Labradorian on Euclid's Curve in Pittsburg, Kansas. Al Ortolani is a winner of the Rattlebone Chapbook Prize and has been featured in Garrison Keillor's Writer's Almanac. Big deal. And Ted Koozer's American Life and Poetry. He is a two-time recipient of the Kansas Notable Book Award. Bull in the Ring, which is a novel, was recently published by Meadowlark Books. A year or two ago now, I think. His most recent collection of poetry, Controlled Burn, was just released by Spartan Press. And then H.C. Palmer was a battalion surgeon for the 1st Infantry Division during the American War in Vietnam. Feet of the Messenger from Bookmark Press was a finalist for the I should have asked how this is pronounced. Balcones Poetry Prize. Thank you. It's a beautiful book. His poems and short stories appeared in New Letters, Narrative Magazine, War, Literature and the Arts, and other literary journals and anthologies. His spiritual place is the Flint Hills of Kansas. I can certainly see why. He lives in Lenexa, Kansas with his wife Valerie and their Boykin Spaniel Julep. So we are all in for a treat today. I'm going to hand it off to Tom.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be in Pittsburg, Kansas. I was going to say that this book, Kansas Matters, sort of got its genesis 35 years ago because I also edited an anthology called What Kansas Means to Me, 20th Century Writers on the Sunflower State. But I decided really the generation of this book and this book goes back almost 50 years when I first met in Dodge City, Kansas, on rodeo days, a man named Gene DeGruson, who was there with a woman named Peggy Green, Peggy of the Flint Hills, who wrote a daily column for the Capital Journal, and they were great friends, and Gene had picked up Peggy and drove her out to Dodge City, and I was traveling with a young friend all over the state. Once I got to know Gene, he became sort of my role model in affirming the importance of the local, of Southeast Kansas, of Kansas in general. And I needed that support at that time. I was a graduate student in English and still deciding what to teach. And Gene, made it so that I was a Kansas studies guy for the rest of my life, and I appreciate that. So I did do in 1990 What Kansas Means to Me, and the press did reach out a couple of years ago and said, hey, isn't it time for a new edition, 21st century writing on the Sunflower State? And there had been, and still is, so many incredible writers and so many incredible pieces that this should be a book about this, about this long. So I always, wherever I am, I apologize to people who aren't in the book because there's so many who are worthy. But I also felt like after 35 years that I didn't trust myself to be sort of the authority anymore, an authority, and so I convinced Leslie to join me in this endeavor, and we put together a collection of 33 writers, 35 writers, no, 33 writers, 35 pieces, which make up Kansas Matters. And we found these pieces coming together sort of in Kansas sections. The first one being home, from home on the range forward. The second one to be family and community, the importance of that in the lives of Kansas. Also the landscape of Kansas, which is so variegated but so interesting wherever you are. And so there's a lot of pieces that focus on that. And then finally, our last section is kind of ad astra. It's like to the stars. It's like, why are Kansans so idealistic? Why are they so inventive? There's a piece in here called How Kansas Gave Texas the Boot. and it clarifies the fact that really the cowboy boot was invented in Kansas. The rainbow pride flag was designed by Gilbert Baker just close to here in Parsons, Kansas. Art therapy started in Kansas. Basketball has its origins in Massachusetts, but really its fruition came in Kansas. So we wanted to put together an anthology that really talked about the feeling that people have about Kansas as a place. That in this book there's an essay by Carl Becker, and he's an historian, came out to KU in the early 1900s on a train, and he describes his first entry into Kansas. There were these two co-eds chattering. Obviously they got on his nerves, but when they crossed the border into Kansas, they stopped talking for a full 5 minutes. And then one of them finally sighed and said, "Dear old Kansas." And so he wrote an essay trying to figure out why two young women would say, "Dear old Kansas." And he concluded with the fact that Kansas is no mere geographical expression, but a state of mind, a religion, and a philosophy in one. And he goes on to explain that in terms of history and culture and landscape, pioneering experience and so on. But he never really examines the feeling behind dear old Kansas. And so my introduction in here is called Dear Old Kansas, and it's sort of outlining the sense that we had, that we wanted to get a sense of why people would still feel that today and need to feel that today. We're kind of giving you Kansas as it was, as it is, and as we hope it continues to be at its best. So I'll turn it over to people who will speak to that. And thanks again for having us in Pittsburgh.
Thanks, Tom. Speaking to what you were talking about, 30 years ago, a friend of mine, Milo Farnetti from Frontenac, you can tell the background. Milo Farnetti, he traveled the world as a journalist, came back and settled in Frontenac. So, Milo, why'd you come back to Frontenac? I want to be with my people. He also told me that back in the 30s and 40s when he was growing up, the coal miners lots of time called one another diggers. I'm going to read the poem Digging from the book and talk about my grandpa and I fishing the strip pits. Digging. I hear the clean rhythmic sound of his sharpshooter 16-inch blade, ash and steel handle, easing down into the clay, his straining back in a deep hole, descending to a sewer line or water main. Or out back in the garden with a long-handled shovel, stooping and standing in rhythm, boot on steel, wood on knee, blade sliding in, arms levering, dark earth up and over, digging. Grandpa could handle a shovel. He consistently dug more coal in one day than any other man of any of the southeast Kansas mines he worked. And following that, he dug graves for horses, footings for buildings, troughs for water, sewer and gas lines, gardens for grandma, and deep ditches in search of broken sewer pipe, heaving sod and clay and rock to one side or over his shoulder, going down, 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 digging. How he smiled how he smiled and whistled between his teeth when digging narrow trenches for the new gas lines by our house. Happy to be standing, shoveling above ground in clean air and sunshine rather than on his hands and knees, 150 feet down in foul, dark air, picking and shoveling coal from a 3-foot seam. And the easy way, the confident way he carried his tools, long-handled shovel, sharpshooter, pick, double-bladed axe, from the bed of his pickup to the plumb line and set about to his work digging. The moist smell of new earth, the rasp and thump of clay, the slice of edge through roots, the economy of motion, sewer line, water line, gas line, grave, garden, ditch, digging. I was lazily reading a Superman comic book up in my treehouse one July morning when I heard the unmistakable rattle and roar of Grandpa Matt's 52 Chevy pickup pulling into our drive. With my eyes closed, I listened intently for the familiar yank on the door lever followed by the squeak of the springs as he slid out of the cab, then the sound, a unique combination of a metallic clang and a low-frequency thump of the pickup door slamming shut. Through the catalpa leaves and beans, I watched him hustle past our fruit-laden apple tree and climb the steps to our back porch. He was whistling a tune between his teeth. He looked happy. As I turned to descend, I caught a fleeting glimpse of his truck bed just beyond the garage. I was almost halfway down, though, when it finally registered, fishing poles. I'd seen fishing poles. After dropping the last 6 feet to the ground, I ran headlong for the house where I met Grandpa coming down the back steps. JT, he exclaimed, his eyes twinkling. I was just looking for you to see if you want to go fishing. I finished the sentence with him. Sure, I'll get my old shoes. You got any worms? Yeah, I dug some in the slough behind Mrs. Brackett's a couple days ago. I called over my shoulder. I've been putting old coffee grounds on them like you showed me. Good. You see the fish barometer today? No, I responded before slipping into my old shoes, the back step, and running into the half-light Averill garage to peer up at a 7-Up bottle inverted in an old mason jar filled with water. Wow, Grandpa, I've never seen it like that. Me neither. Cupping my hands around my eyes to cut the glare, I leaned against the back screen of her house and announced, Mom, I'm going fishing with Grandpa Matt. She called back her consent without missing a beat in her rhythmic transfer of clothes from washer to clothes basket. I grabbed the sawworms from the garage, ran to the truck, and stood on the running board, to swing the worms into the back of the pickup. There, I spied a water jug, gunny sack, minnow bucket, 3 cane poles, and Grandpa's ever-present immense scoop shovel. Then it was north out of town toward the strip pits. As we rumbled down a dusty brown dirt road, Grandpa began to exuberantly sing in his deep baritone. I found a horseshoe. I found a horseshoe. I picked it up and nailed it on the door. Come on, JT, sing. I found a horseshoe. I found a horse. Sing tring-a-ling-a-ling, tring-a-ling-a-ling, tra-la-la-la. Sing tring-a-ling-a-ling, tring-a-ling. It was a holy sound. My grandpa and I headed out in his old truck, rumbling along, trailing a diaphanous plume of brown Kansas dust. Suddenly, he slammed on the brakes while simultaneously reaching out to stop my headlong lurch. Look, he said, blackberries. In a flash, he rummaged behind the seat, found his old miner's bucket, and ran to the ditch, to a blackberry patch where he began picking frantically. In the absolute quiet, I heard the sweet, sacred sound that my brother John would eloquently describe years later in a yearning Kansas poem. I want to hear juicy blackberries plop in an old tin bucket. Got enough for a pie, Grandpa smiled proudly as he slid into, I get emotional. As he slid into that cab, tossed me a ripe berry. At the strip pits, Grandpa unleashed the cane poles, 2 13-footers for him and a 10-footer for me. We loaded up the gear and I followed him into the overgrown path that would lead to the water. We fished in fits and starts, for Grandpa was not a patient angler. 5 or 10 minutes in one spot was usually enough to either pull a few perch, bluegill, or bass from the clear water, or give up and move on and over through the dirt dumps in search of another hole. After a few hours, he noticed I was getting hot, tired, and sunburned. Let's take 5, JT, he pronounced, as he set the poles and led me to the shade where he pulled some beef jerky and 2 gooey Hershey bars from the fishing box. Then he walked to the water's edge, scooped up a generous handful of mud, and returned to gently rub it on my sunburned skin as I ate. We lay on our backs, looking long at the immense Kansas sky before packing up our gear to head back to the truck. Grandpa led the way, water jug and gunny sack full of panfish in one hand, cane poles in the other. I followed along with the fishing boat and minnow bucket. That night, as I lay on my bottom bunk thinking about our day, our giant window fan, drawing cool night air over my burning arms and face. I began to sing softly to myself. I found horseshoe.
I will not sing. That's why I hate going after JT. You never know where it's going to take you. I'm going to read an excerpt from what I've got in here. And it's a story about strip pits, since we're there. It was a very special area for me that offered freedom and solace, you know. One afternoon, my mother gave me a copy of Thomas Paine's Age of Reason. I had no idea if she knew what she was handing me, but it rocked the vase on my nightstand. New thoughts, like no revelation except through natural creation, the Bible rife with contradictions, church doctrines written by fallible men. The summer before my senior year of high school, Thoreau had begun the quake that cracked the foundation of my worldview. Thomas Paine kicked down the basement wall. On Sundays, I began to skip Mass, a secret I kept for months. On Sundays, I rode my motorcycle towards the Newman Center, but would veer into the countryside and Oldham's pits. I visited a muskrat who'd become a regular acquaintance. We were not close like a person and a dog are, but I was growing fond of the V's he cut through the water. It's true that I felt closer to the muskrat than to the judgmental priest. I never gave the muskrat a name. No one christens a rodent in the wild. But over time, the strip pits became my church. Oldham's pits were just across the bypass. I could be there in minutes from my parents' front door. They were mule-dug pits, stripped with a drag line, shallow by large, giant shovel standards. The slag piles were overgrown with sumac, poplars, and new-growth hardwoods. The dirt turnoff from the highwood was unassuming, as quiet as an afterthought. Within 50 yards, the highway noise was muffled as the road became trails. I shut down my bike and set the kickstand. Oldham's consisted of only a few acres, woven with fishing paths and rabbit runs. Some days I'd walk, other days I'd sit on a log and listen to the voice in my head, to the leaves on the poplar. I imagined Thoreau and Concord. On occasion I'd bring a book to read or a notebook and Bic pen. Nothing would come from my scribblings, but I kept them near like a secret, like a love poem. One Sunday, inspired by a hawk, I took off my clothes and swam out to muskrat depth. The hawk beat his wings so close to my face that I could hear his feathers rustling. Swimming was an attempt for complete immersion. Somewhere, a semi was jake braking around the curve to 4th Street, but I wasn't listening to the big noise, more to the small twittering in the woods. My friend Brock Morton had introduced me to Oldham's pits. He'd gone there for his junior Academy of Science research, which had something to do with finding balance after artificial imbalance in a Crawford County strip pit. Science baffled me, but I liked the thought of his small boat, the quiet water. He was one of my first friends to keep his own counsel in an age of peer pressure. Once, while walking along the railroad tracks toward Broadway, We found a spill of boxcar grain between the rails. Beans or oats, I don't recall. The dull winter sun shone flatly on the grain. Brock announced, as if the entire town were listening, that he could live on this for a long time. I didn't say anything. I preferred cheeseburgers. The irony of finding nature on mined land was not lost on me. It would become a growing theme that gave me pause. Whereas Oldham's pits were west of town and old enough for ash and oak to take root, east of town, the steam and gas-powered shovels were ripping south across the pastures, heaping tall mounds of dirt and clay along the half-mile trenches. Here, little growth had found purchase. Access roads ran between the dumps for a mile section. In America, the Vietnam War was at the height of escalation. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy had recently been assassinated. Young men's lives hung on the chance of a lottery system. I did not fear military induction as much as I feared being forced to leave home. I had begun to realize that I had put down family and community roots, which as a wannabe free spirit embarrassed me. I was working construction to pay my college tuition. My 2S student deferment was important to me, but mostly I lived in denial. I kept the dark bitumen of war in my chest. After work, I'd shower and eat a light supper. Our house was busy. My parents liked keeping their children at home. Our bones of contention over politics or hair length or religious outlook percolated below the surface. We maintained a fragile détente. I was fortunate in this regard. I was left alone to think what I wanted if I didn't vocalize my thoughts. Religiously, I drove my Honda east rather than west and rode the new dumps, exploring the striations of the pits, watching them fill with water, alkaline or acid, I never knew which. Some evenings I sat on a mountain of fresh dirt and watched the sunset, the only sound being that of a few distant crows. There was beauty in the colors of desolation. One evening I rode into a tangle of trees and found an early cemetery of 10 to 15 graves. The stones were weathered and etched in 19th century German. Many of the local farmers were of German descent, but I didn't recognize any names. Somewhere nearby there'd been a farm, a community. The shovel's bucket turned the earth in a semicircle around them. Now a poem. Muskrat Dump. The afternoon sunlight warms my back while woodpeckers drum hollow limbs in the tree tangled dumps. A few remaining persimmons darken. Wind rustles the brown undergrowth. Leaves clatter and snag on bunchberry vines. I lie among them like a branch, fallen and comfortable with decay. The pit's green water crests a canoe, red keel creasing the surface like the snout of a muskrat, stretching for the coal slag shoreline. Overhead, the blue sky is interrupted only by thoughts of sleep, and amazingly, out of the scrub oak, a December butterfly, as fragile and temporary as daylight. Thank you.
You want this stool?
Maybe. See if it fits.
No.
Yeah.
Works that. He threatened me with that coming down. Thank you. Oh.
Ah, yes. Let me get you my
Well, I get to follow Seamus Haney digging. And then Al Jim, James Tate, or Delani. So I'll do my best. I saw this I just brought this along because it bears reading. Who said this? When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. For art establishes the basic human truths, touchstones of our judgment. JFK's inauguration. You think that applies?
I think you trumped it.
I keep wanting to use that word sometimes.
Heckling is part of how we get along when we do reading.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you, JD. Thank you, Tom and Leslie. Thank you so much. Bringing me back to the place where I was born, a little hospital on the line between Frontenac and Pittsburg called Mount Carmel in 1936. So, and thanks to you guys, but thanks to these two wonderful poets that I get to read with. My first two poems are a reading from my book, and I do have some books I'll put back on the table there. And since this is Pittsburgh, I think I brought a dozen books, and you can first come, first serve. The first two poems I'm reading are from my book, Feet of the Messenger, and they're about the Flint Hills and about place, my place. This is my place too, but when I found the Flint Hills, I found home. The other two poems that 2 and 2 is 4 are about my time in Vietnam and my time after Vietnam, in Vietnam. The first poem takes place in the Flint Hills. It's about a CEO I used to work for who was fed up with the corporate chaos. It's called In Search of Place. The Kansas Flint Hills, 24 August 2008. You come to the prairie searching for a way out, constrained by agendas, budgets, contracts, and a sense you've missed something more than a business opportunity. You're ready to negotiate. Slow the pace. You've nothing to lose, so stay to see it through. Opting for a dirt road to a ranch you'd read about, you are astonished by the nothingness. When the rancher asks, ride my horse or drive? You opt for the four-wheeler. Surprised when he tosses you the keys and points to the wheel ruts and says, follow the two-track to find your way. You leave the cell phone in the cup holder, think to lock the car, but reconsider, then ride the 2 tracks switchbacks to the top of a hill where, for the first time, you see beyond what your eyes can know. You cut the engine, face into the wind and walk, wading through blue stems, standing as tall as your heart. You search after a red-tailed scream and consider your next move. Tide is the name of the next poem, and I was privileged a long time ago to have Tom tell me this was a good poem. And he actually read it a few times when he was reading. Thank you. This poem involves a perigee moon, and I just want to explain that. The moon orbits the Earth in an oval fashion, and when it's the farthest away, it's called apogee, and when it's closest, it's called perigee. And when the moon and the sun and the Earth are all in one line, the gravity increases a lot. And so we get tides when you get king tides, harvest moons, and supermoons. I also knew, because I was a geology major at KU, I'm wasting my time here. I'm geology major at KU, I knew about the Permian Sea, and that it was 300 million years old, and that as the Earth pushed the sea up, it became limestone that we could touch and hold. The name of the poem is Tide, and there's an epigraph by Jim Harrison, who was my favorite writer maybe in the United States, if not tied with 2 or 3 others for it. He wrote this poem in Moon Suite shortly before he died. And the epigraph from the poem is the Earth was forcing me not to forget her. Tide. My father believed the bedrock beneath our ranch, once an immense sea, was still alive, that natural rhythms persisted in its sluggish consolidation. He taught me to listen for echoes of breaking surf, but I couldn't hear them, even at night, with the wind quiet and my ear pressed to an outcropping. He believed the gravitational pull of a full perigee moon could still move the old limestone. He called it land tide. I thought that too improbable until one night the moon rose so full of light we could have counted the calves in our pasture. Then, when its bottom edge caught the crest of a hill, and just as I felt the prairie lift and slide sideways beneath my feet, he said, "There, that's it." I've never recovered from that night or the weight of his hand on my shoulder.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next two poems are by request. Somebody here today requested these two poems. These are about Vietnam. One is a PTSD incident that happens to a guy when he goes shopping at the grocery store. I describe a battle in here where American soldiers had to shoot their way into a village, and it wasn't like Lieutenant Cowley's shooting 500 men, women, moms, dads, babies, boys and girls in the ditches at My Lai. But this was my battalion that I was in had a squad that was ambushed by Viet Cong from the village, shooting from doors and windows. So they had to go in and take it. The name of this poem is called "In the Bread Aisle at Safeway." Where'd that come from? And then Graham Greene. I'm rereading his book right now, The Quiet American. My goodness. Graham Greene's in the book says, "And then something happens, as you knew it would, and nothing can ever be the same again." In the bread aisle at Safeway, the sergeant came home from the war carrying visions and echoes and recurring dreams, his soul trashed in a tiny bin of brain, a narrative encrypted in prefrontal snarls and no way to sort it out. There were playbacks, the worst, the ambush, AK-47s from inside the village, his rifle squad clawing to cover in the shallow road ditch, 7.65 splashing red dirt in their faces, tracers whining overhead and beside and between. Every villager a hostage and a shield, every hooch a place to hide. Muzzle flashes from windows and doors, chickens airborne flailing to rooftops like confetti shot from 4th of July cannons, and pigs, those damn pigs squealing back and forth between the ditch and the village. No way out. 2 of his squad down and the medic is dead. There was no choice. Grenades and M60s, the sergeant screams, kill everything and everyone. When it was over, they walk in. The only sounds stifled sobs and thumps of boots against the dead pigs. The sergeant turned to search a pathway between hooches. He saw a woman, so close he heard her breathing. She wore black peasant clothes and held a small child to her chest. In the woman's free hand, an AK-47. The child whined, its eyes fixed on his. It made a little cry. The woman raised the muzzle, but the lieutenant fired first, through the child and into the woman's chest. This morning, the VC woman is back in the bread aisle at Safeway. She has caged the child inside a grocery cart. He must act. The woman shoves him away, then runs for the exit. Cartwheels squealing like those damn shot pigs. The child's cry like the shriek of a ghost.
Mm.
And the last poem was about a trip with my wife Valerie back to Vietnam, and we went to a place where I knew exact location of where a friend of mine was killed in a battle. Just some terms you should know. This is 40 years after the war. Sapper. A sapper is a Viet Cong carrying satchels of explosives in and through your perimeter. Dust off is a medevac helicopter. And when I say click here, I'm talking about kilometers. And the name of this poem is Thompson's Boots. And I stole from Denise Levertov. You know who she is. God is surely patiently trying to immerse us in a different language. That's pretty good. Thompson's Boots. 5 clicks south of Phuc Vinh, Val at my side, and my first visit since the war. I'm searching the old fire base, grown back to jungle after 30 years. Thinking of Thompson the morning he returned from R&R in Hong Kong, boasting he had slept with 5 women in 3 different languages. I'm looking for the spot where I'd found his boots that next morning after the sapper attack. Thompson, vaporized by the satchel charge, except for his feet and ankles still inside the boots, his olive drab cotton socks turned down to secure the laces, the right boot upright and the left on its side, inches away. And I remember how carefully I had lifted them, one in each hand, and placed them inside a body bag with someone else's body already there. I remember that zipping sound before we loaded the bag alongside the 2 wounded on a Huey dust-off bound for Tonsanut Air Base. And I'm recalling distinctly now his socks, the inked initials, the splashes of blood, and jutting above the socks what was left of the shafts of his tibias, glistening like the whitest of ivories. And not 2 paces away, my landmark, that section of blown tank track I've just uncovered from the thick vegetation. It must be that piece of track, 24 inches square, but rusted. So when I lift an edge, it crumbles. Orange residue in my hands sifting through my fingers back to earth. Confident now we are near the exact spot, I reach to touch Val's hand to turn her face from a shaft of sunlight, then kneel and place her hand on my shoulder, then my hands where Thompson's boots might have been. I search the green mossed undergrowth with my fingertips. It has the texture of embroidered cloth. I want to pray, but don't find the words. And after a long silence, when I look up, Val is still here. Thank you so much. This cane is from Kyiv in the Ukraine. Another political statement. No, it's a humanitarian statement.
I think we have time for some questions or conversation. Perhaps our writers would pull their chairs up here to sit for conversation, or
Whatever you want.
or just stand if you're going to answer something. Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience?
We're gonna feel real dumb if you don't have any. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I may have one. When you're writing a poem, are you concentrating more on the factual pieces of it, or are you trying to, through that, maybe reach a more spiritual connection? That's probably a dumb question.
No, it's a great question.
Well, as William Carlos Williams said, no ideas except in things. And so, for me, I may start with the things, describing the things, and then hopefully, if the poem or essay is going in a direction I want it to, then the rest of that will appear, I think, through the things. A difficulty lies in telling more than showing, and so I have to go back to, am I showing this? Did anybody hear what I just said?
You have an answer to that?
Oh, about, well, I think of a story first, because I like stories, even if they're only that long. And then I think of sounds and rhythms and words that maybe stretch the imagination a little bit when they're said, but somehow get to be a part of it because of the rest of it brings it all together.
HC,
Yes.
why do you write about the stuff that you do rather than blue skies and sunsets to get away from it?
Because I don't want to write about blue skies and sunsets. I do have a couple poems in the book about sunsets, but they're special sunsets.
Yeah.
I just, it's a story. It still goes back to the story for me.
They're amazing.
Just one of the things I think of is that sense of each one of us having a personal geography in which we live that has to do with where we've lived and who we've lived with and so on. And part of what Leslie and I were trying to do in the book, and I think part of what we were looking for in the writers, is that they write out of that very particular, not blue skies that everybody lives under, but their own particular sky that they live under. And I think that's the strength of the book in terms of the essays that came together and came to us. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I have
everything.
2 questions. First one is for Al.
Yeah.
We can't see your shirt. What does it say?
Okay. Does anybody get it?
Yeah,
It's
I
the
get it.
one.
Where'd you get it? Is what I'm
Off Facebook. I found it and I thought, that's so dark. I gotta have it. And I bought another one too that it's long sleeve. I should have brought in. You want to explain it? Anybody want to?
Let me see it here good now.
I don't know that the Latin is exact. Go ahead.
Well, it's. I think it's Cato used to end all his speeches with that. Carthage must be destroyed.
Oh. And?
So they destroyed the city, plowed it, just completely destroyed it, and plowed it under with salt.
So, yeah.
Plowed it under with salt, yes. Yes. I thought it was appropriate for now. Yes.
And my second question is for Tom and Leslie. Why did you choose the people you chose to be included in the book?
Why did we choose the writers we chose who were in the book? So, well, as Tom mentioned earlier, like we could do 3 volumes of this book. In Kansas, we're very, very rich and really excellent writers who write about Kansas. Some of it was we decided we wanted them all to be living writers, and so that narrowed down some of it. Sadly, we did lose Jim Hoy right before the book came out. Sadly. But so that was part of it. We needed a diversity of voices. We wanted all parts of Kansas represented and all ways of living in Kansas represented as well as we could. And then, the press limited us at 100,000 words. And I think we turned in 112,000. Tom, did you want to add to that?
But we were on deadline.
And deadline too, yeah.
No, I mean, there were some pieces in the book that we knew they were already published, we just knew we had to have them. Like Andrew Millward's essay called Basketball, where he talks about James Naismith and Fall Gallen both coming, out of KU. Naismith, the first and most losing coach in basketball, KU basketball history, because his philosophy was, you develop students, you develop people who learn to work together. And Fall Gallen's was you win, and those two things still exist in basketball as philosophy. So we knew, we knew some of those things, and when people think of Kansas, they think of, John Brown, I say in there, they think about Prairie, they think about, all these different, Wizard of Oz is represented in here.
Yeah.
Our silver shoes up here. But Les says, we'll click 3 times and go home.
Not Ruby.
So that's part of it, is that we knew there were pieces out there that we just had to have in there, and then other things, we solicited a lot of work from people that we knew could write or had stories to tell, and we got some really fine work from some writers who had never written an essay before, even. So we were real happy about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Giving voice.
Because being a Catholic boy, being a priest, you had to be abstinent. I couldn't go for that. So writing poetry was the next best thing. Being a poet, my friend here admitted to being a mystic in our Hip Talking Heads week last week. And there's magic in the air in poetry. There's magic. And so part of what I do when I write, I look for the magic. I listen for it. I look for it like in things. There's magic in things. There's magic in songs. There's magic in voice. There's magic in nature. So that's what I go for. And the spiritual kind of finds its way through there, or it is there already.
Depends on how transcendental you are, that's what it comes down to.
The only exception to non-living writers besides Jim Hoyan is I amassed a sort of collection of literary tornadoes, because it all starts with the Wizard of Oz, and then it sort of seems like a requirement. If you're going to be a Kansas writer, you're going to have a tornado eventually. So we got Gordon Parks from Fort Scott, his tornado that starts the learning tree, Langston Hughes' tornado that in Stanton, quote, Lawrence, Kansas, that starts that novel. Bob Day's Last Cattle Drive tornado, so
Sure.
that's the one exception. But we got some living tornadoes too.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Al, what was your thought the first time you saw Oldham's pits destroyed?
It was like a death. It was a loss. It made me real sad. It's not only had that little oasis out there of wildlife been taken away, but so had a lot of memories. And Lauren Isley, who I mentioned in the rest of my essay, talked about how in this day and age there are little pockets of, I'm using my terms now, little pockets of wildness in the world. It might be along a ditch, it might be in a little, hedgerow, but see, that was a pocket of wildness, where things were, it had all been, adulterated, but had regrown in its own fashion. And so I saw that as sort of a loss there of that. Yeah. I went out there once with a guy and his girlfriend, and they were going to have us, drop zilch. And so I assumed that meant we were going to take some hallucinogenic drugs. And of course, I was very leery of that. And they blindfolded us, and that freaked me out a little bit. And, I was with a girl, and I thought, well, she might like me more if she's blindfolded. But ended up, they hung plastic bags in trees and lit them to psychedelic music, and then the plastic bag dripped, zip, 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 zip. And that's how we dropped zilch. That was zilch, zilch, zilch. And I thought, I was a little disappointed, but I thought, it's still pretty cool. So those memories disappeared.
I want to share something, a Kansas writer, William Stafford, born in Hutchinson. I think Al and I have talked about, did he say this or not? Even if he didn't, I write a column for the paper, deadline. You got a deadline, you gotta make it. That's one way to look at this, and the other is just writing in general. It's like, what do you do when you get writer's block? William Stafford was asked. I said, I just lower my standards and keep writing. That's exactly what I do. I mean, and I suggest anybody who wants or does the writing, you know, if you feel like, I don't know what, just start writing about what's in the room, who's around, who's going on, how you feel. Just get in there and rock and roll, and it works.
I asked Stafford's son that same question because I had heard that story from my students who went to a meeting or a class he gave on the campus, and they told me that story, and I thought, okay, I got to find out. So I went to Kim Stafford and I said, now, I heard your father said this. And he goes, oh yeah. He goes, it's like an airplane. You know, you're flying along in this airplane and you want to pick up speed and you want to go up. But you can't ascend because you don't have enough speed, and if you just pull the throttle back, you're going to stall. And so the best thing to do is just to dive. And as you dive, you pick up speed, and then you can pull it up. And I thought, that's writing.
Put it off the throttle.
But you got to pull it up in time. Yeah,
Sooner or later.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
One more.
I'd like you to talk about the inspiration that you get from this present moment versus your memories. JT, your poem was filled with memories of your relationship with your grandfather. HC, a lot of your poems are about your memories of Vietnam. How contemporary is your inspiration versus memories that come back to you that have now a deeper significance than that moment in which you experienced it?
It's a good question.
I think you answered your own question. I mean, very articulately. Yes, thank you.
I would love to hear your perspectives on it because you're the artist, you're the ones who come here to hear today, and if you would, please, would you talk about that? Because I've been writing my memories recently, and I can't write them as beautifully as you guys do, but I'm struck by the amount of significance they now have for me that I couldn't articulate earlier.
I think in the first of my book, I say that Vietnam changed my life, not only in what I've done since then, but the way I interpret what I had experienced as a child in high school, college, and so forth. And I think that's a good place to look for places. Something's going to happen now that will set off a memory, then you can fool around. But you know, it takes me a year, 9 months to write a poem, and then the last two poems, all of the poems I read today, one is in your book, I didn't mess with it. But the other three, every time I read them, I think, oh, that could be a little bit better. And so I think it's the same thing with what something happens. You say, oh yeah, you know, that happened to me, and somebody hit a baseball and I caught it with one hand or whatever. And you can write a baseball poem like B.H. Fairchild does. Well, you can't.
I'm not sure what to answer you, Bert. I don't think about it too much, I guess. It's just, you know, I can't help it. You know, it's kind of like getting kicked out of class in Catholic grade school. JT, settle down. I can't. So you got to go to the hall. JT, stop writing. I can't. You know, so it kind of just happens for me and I notice I'm writing all the time. Most writers are. Standing up here, all the four of us are. There's a poem going for what's going on right now. I guarantee it, or a column, or something's happening. So that's my answer.
Then Bert, you know, the older we get, the less we look ahead, I think, and the more we look behind. And I'm doing a lot of behind looking. You know, I live more in the behind than I do in the future, you know. And I'm really kind of just trying to make sense of how I got to where I am. And so sometimes it'll just be, okay, this memory is bothering me, you know, I'll go through it. Other times, like somebody said, you get into something that happens now that reminds you of that, you know. And yeah, I write every day, and 90% of it's yesterday that I'm writing about, you know.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's hear it again for putting together this book. If you don't buy one, they've got them here. You can get one on loan here at the library too.
Yeah. So we have refreshments. Thank you.
So, Fred, yours.